Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all having a wonderful day today. Today, we're going to be talking about a very cool little firearm, as you can tell by the title of the video and the intro, as I am sure. But before we get started, if you'd like to support the channel in any way, you can like, share, and subscribe. And if there's something else that interests you, you can go to my Subscribe Star, which you get a lot of extra content every month, or you can buy steel targets from me in the link in the description. So let's go ahead and get into it. So right off the bat, this is a Polymer 80 Glock 26 in Sniper Gray. And for the YouTube censor watching this video right now, this is a completely unmodified firearm exactly in the way that it came from the factory. So today we're of course going to be talking about the firearm, how it performed, and how it compares to a factory Glock, like my factory Glock 17, and some of the reasons behind why I purchased it. So this is of course a Polymer 80, so it is not a factory Glock. It is essentially a carbon copy of a Glock, though the frame is somewhat different and there are a few changes here and there. In some ways better, in some ways worse. We'll talk about those. This specific frame, because they offer it in a lot of different colors, everything from FDE to green to purple, blue, all that sort of stuff. So the lower is, of course, as I mentioned, Polymer 80, which is made here in the USA. The stippling on it is really good. The lower parts kit that it came with is essentially OEM with one exception. So everything that it came with was very, very nice, very standard from the factory. So the trigger feels very Glock-ish, about 5 pounds or so. It's fairly clean. There's almost no grit in it whatsoever. Has of course also a very short reset, just like any other Glock, because it is essentially an identical Glock trigger. Now the slide and the barrel and all of the internal parts, that I believe is all the Patmos Judah line of products. So of course it fits a regular Glock 26. The only really main difference in the slide versus a Gen 1 through 4 Glock is that it does have slide serrations, or forward slide serrations. So you have forward slide serrations for doing your press checks or whatnot. That being said, you don't really need forward serrations to do press checks. For instance, here's a Gen 3 Glock 17, and you can very easily just grab the slide, no slide serrations, very easily, with very minimal force, run the slide just by gripping the front part of the slide. So the forward style slide serrations, they look nice and they are functional. They do give you a really good purchase for your hand if you're doing press checks, which is a good idea to check if they're loaded, especially when you're out in the field and you don't necessarily want to rack the slide all the way. So generally putting your hand on there and just checking just a little bit, or pulling back on the back just to see if you have a round chambered. So it is nice and a lot of people like it. Not a big deal one way or the other for me. The barrel, I believe standard Glock 26 length, so you have a 3.2 inch barrel, I believe. This one, however, has a very good target crown on the front, so that means that it's recessed inside. The rifling is recessed a little bit. In this case, it looks like a 16th, maybe, yeah, about a 16th of an inch, I would say. So that protects the edge of the barrel. So if you were to drop this, as I have several times, straight down, you will not damage the rifling and therefore ruin the accuracy of your pistol. So everything on the slide and upper receiver is fairly decent. The only thing I will notice is that the finish is nowhere near as good as any Glock, whether Gen 1 through 5. This is a Gen 3 that's been holstered thousands and thousands of times and has thousands and thousands of rounds on it. And its finish is actually holding up better than this Polymer 80 Glock 26 that I've had for about a month. So here we have just the complete slide, and as you'll notice, it does have the dual captured recoil spring, so it is fairly standard from pretty much all modern Glocks. I believe Gen 4 and on have the dual capture springs, so that it's supposed to reduce recoil a little bit further and make it a little bit softer shooting, because you have of course a more modular recoil impulse. On a Glock 26, it's very needed because you have a very short recoil cycle. Of course, it's not like a Glock 17 or a Glock 34 where you have a very long slide that soaks up a lot of that energy. You have a very, very short slide, which is consequently not as heavy, and it's a little snappy. Not bad, but it is a little more snappy than a Glock 17 or any other sort of full-size handgun. Moving on from there, let's go ahead and talk about the barrel. I'm not going to take the barrel out of it. So talking about accuracy, I'll go ahead and show a picture of what I did on steel. I did a 5-round group on steel from about 12 yards in about 2.5 inches, which for a designated concealed carry piece is very, very good, especially I believe I was just using like Wolf ammunition, so very cheap ammunition as well. More than accurate enough for any sort of real world use case scenario, and if you're a better shooter, a better handgun shooter, I'm not the greatest handgun shooter in the world, I'm not really even that good with them, you could definitely get that down to around an inch at 10 yards if you were doing your part. Glocks are inherently fairly accurate firearms, and that has fortunately transferred over to this Polymer 80 Glock 26. Now, one thing that is important to mention is that, of course, the Glock 26 is about an inch, maybe a little bit over an inch shorter than like your full-size duty Glock 17, which means that your sight radius is also about 15% shorter, a little bit over an inch shorter. So that means that it's slightly less precise. That also being said, it is actually faster to line up because, of course, there's less travel left and right. The farther out you get, the harder it is to align, that sort of thing. So it's very fast to bring up on target, but of course it's slightly less precise. The furthest that I've taken this P80 out to is 50 yards on an 11.5 by 18 target, which is much, much further than you will shoot in a normal concealed carry sort of distance. But of course it's very, very easy to do, even with a short sight radius and inexpensive ammunition. You could easily take this to 100 yards and beyond if you really wanted to, though of course that is kind of outside of its use case envelope. Now, talking about the sights, one advantage of this over like if you were to go to the store and to just buy a Glock, is this one here actually comes with metal sights. Now, the sights that it's shipped with are blacked out, so they're black rears, black fronts. I've never shot with that style of sights before on a pistol. Most of what I shoot are either 3-dot or some sort of fiber optic or some combination therein, but I've never shot with blacked out sights, and I actually really like it. And I know that there's a lot of people that actually carry blacked out sights and they really like it just for whatever reason. Very, very low contrast, but it's actually very, very easy to line up and put on target and to shoot even at longer range. Now, are fiber optics easier to pick up? Yes, but they're also less durable. So right from the factory, this comes with metal iron sights of the blacked out variety. You could put like a neon white marker, neon yellow, or some sort of other color on the front post to give it a little bit more contrast, though honestly, in shooting, I didn't even need it. Alrighty, so now let's go ahead and move back down to the lower receiver. Everything in here, as I said, is exactly as it came from the factory. Your standard dual locking blocks, nothing really special whatsoever. The trigger is, again, just mil spec. The one thing that it did come with that was kind of nice is it came with a extended safety that is very, very sharp, so it sticks up a good 1/4 of an inch off of the side of your actual frame. So I might sand that down or round out the corners a little bit, but as of right now it is completely unmodified. The stippling on it is really good. It's much better than any standard Gen 1 through 4 Glock stippling. For instance, just comparing it real quickly to the Glock 17 right here, which is very, very plasticky, and at this point almost all of the stippling is very, very worn down, and of course with finger grooves on it. With the Glock 26 you have a much more aggressive pattern. It's much more, feels like sandpaper in your hands, though not uncomfortably, and I didn't shoot this with gloves at all. You don't really need gloves to shoot it. So even shooting several hundred rounds at a time, no sort of issues with it whatsoever. You have good stippling in the rear, on the sides, and of course in the front right here in this little nub. So it's very, very aggressive stippling, which you want in a smaller handgun because of course real estate is at a premium for your hands. So everything that can be stippled should be stippled. That way there it gives you as much grip as possible, even though you have less grip to work with. Now, talking about that, we of course here have an empty magazine. And so what we have here now with a 12-round extension magazine is we have a full grip. So I don't have fairly large hands. My hands are slightly smaller than average. So with a Glock 26, I do get a perfect full grip, at least with my right hand. With my left hand, something that was really obnoxious at first, I had to get used to, was I can't have my hand as high up on a Glock 26, or at least this Polymer 80 Glock 26, as I can on my Glock 17, because I would constantly ride or push up on the slide lock or slide release, whatever you want to call it. And so I would constantly lock the slide back after one shot and be like, oh, no, still got ammunition, run the slide release, and then be good to go. So I had to change my left hand a little bit, so I have to actually dip down my left hand a little bit, show you there. So normally I would carry very high like this, And that works fine on my Glock 17, but on this one here, for whatever reason, slightly different geometry, I need to actually drop my left hand down a little bit so I'm not pushing up on that slide stop / slide release. Now on top of that, the geometry, as I mentioned, is slightly different. On here you have a slightly different trigger face, so instead of being flat and slightly rounded out, you do have a little bit of texturing here in the front and this little nub if you did want to put your finger there. I don't shoot like that, but if some people do and some people like it, so more power to you if you do. You also have a slightly more aggressive beaver tail off the back. It is slightly longer, which is again another good thing. You also have a trigger guard undercut on here, which is very, very nice, which again, even for my smaller hands, it allows me to get up there and get a full purchase. Now, if you have huge hands, this grip might be a little too short for you, or you might have to get a different extension on your magazine. This one specifically, as I mentioned, this is actually a Glock factory magazine, which I prefer to carry when I'm actually carrying it. 12 rounds, very, very easy to load, and gives you a full grip, at least for me. Now, I wouldn't really call it a beveled magazine well, but there is a little bit of material removed around the edges, which does make it slightly easier to insert magazines. I did not have any trouble reloading with either 12 rounds or like standard Glock 17 round magazines. They all fed very, very easily. The magwell is much better than basically any standard Glock. Maybe not as good as the Glock Gen 5, but I haven't played around with those at all, so I don't really know. But it is a nice feature, and it is very, very mildly beveled, which does make those reloads a little bit easier. On top of that, the magazine well being so short means that you have a huge amount of angle that you can insert your 17 full-size round magazine, 17, 15, 33, whatever you're shooting. You can put in those extended magazines really, really easy because you have a huge amount of angles that you can come from because that magazine well is so short. Now, moving up to the front here, we do have a micro rail on it. It is very, very short, but the nice thing about that is it is actually a standard Glock rail, so it will actually fit standard Glock block. So I have my Glock attachment on this Olight. This is the Mini something something. It's a 600 lumen light. It's very, very bright. But it works really well, and it actually does mount up. Now, finding a holster for a Polymer 80 with an Olight light is pretty much a nightmare, so I wouldn't recommend doing that. Unless, of course, you have somebody who does like custom holsters, then you might be able to find something. But in most scenarios, it's pretty difficult to find. Moving back from there, last thing on the lower is, of course, the trigger. So trigger is fairly standard for a Glock. Feels like it's 5.5 pounds. You have a lot of take up. Short reset, so you have this much take up. You know, it feels like a ½ inch, somewhere around there of take up. You hit a very pronounced wall, you roll through it at about 5.5 pounds. Perfect for a carry trigger or a duty trigger, and more than accurate enough to shoot again 50, 100 yards. No problem as long as you know what you're doing. Actually, one last thing to mention is that the slide stop / slide release is like an old 34 style, so it's not quite the non-existent ones that you'll find on some Glocks, and it actually does have some fencing, though in my experience it did not help at all around it, as opposed to most Glocks where there is no fencing on it at all. That being said, when I initially got it out of the box, it was impossible to operate with one hand. You would pretty much have to put two hands on it to get it to release the slide, or put some sort of rearward tension on it and push down at the same time. That being said, that's one of those things that you're not paying for Glock machining quality, so you probably had a little bit of a rough edge on the slide stop or slide release and on the actual cut on the slide itself. So after working that in over about 200 slams home, it did loosen up and now works just fine. Though something to note is that there is a overall break-in period for Polymer 80s just in general. So when I first took it out, I put about 50 rounds through it, and I had a couple malfunctions with it. Anything from like a stovepipe, I had one failure to feed, and I ended up having a couple failures to feed later on as well with 17 round magazines, or in this case this is a 17 plus 3, so this is a 20 round magazine. Depending on how you grip it, because there is some movement here, especially with steel cased ammunition, if you push all the way to the back or all the way to the front in some cases, depending on how you're gripping the firearm, you can cause it to have a misfeed. I never had an issue with any of my either Magpul 12 round magazines designed specifically for the Glock 26, or of course with the factory Glock 26 magazines. The only time I had an issue over the last 500 rounds of shooting it was with a 17 round magazine. I'll show you a video of that, but basically just had a little misfeed, so you just had to pull back on the slide a bit and let it go home. Oh, malfunction, first one. All right, let's try that again.
All right.
Now that we just talked about it, let's go ahead and touch on reliability. As I mentioned, almost all polymer 80s, whether you put them together yourself or whether they come fully assembled, you're going to have some sort of break-in period, especially if you have to do some work to it, and there is some fine tuning that goes into that whole process. Whereas if you go and you buy any brand new Glock, it's good to go out of the box. You should be able to run for thousands and thousands of rounds without issue. So for about the first 100 rounds, like I mentioned, the first time I took it out, I had a few issues. I took it back out with some better ammunition, had like another issue, and then after that did not have any issues except for that one issue that I showed you with the 17 round magazine not quite feeding steel cased ammunition properly. So other than that, it has been very, very good, and as I'm sure the round count gets higher and higher, and as long as you're using the appropriate magazines, high quality ammunition, you're probably never going to have an issue with it. Last thing that we're going to talk about is actually holster compatibility. So as you'll notice from the intro, I was doing a lot of draws from my range kit. So this is on, generally speaking, it's on a Shepherd defensive belt, and what we're rating it on is the Sefarland QLS, so we can just click it in and out as we need it, so I can transfer it to different belts, transfer it to different holsters, all that sort of fun stuff with the QLS system, which I really like. So the Polymer 80 Glock 26 does not fit perfectly in this holster. It doesn't really click into place, but there is a lot of friction because, again, the slide geometry is slightly different. It's actually a little more blocky than a standard Glock, so it's actually a little uglier than a standard Glock. And on top of that, the trigger guard is different, has a different cut, and the frame itself is also a little different. So it does not have a perfect fit in this holster at all, and you kind of got to give it a lot of force. So it has a lot of retention, but it doesn't actually click into place. With the Glock 17, of course, which this holster is designed for, this is a skull head arms G-code style holster, and of course clicks in just fine, gives you still a good amount of retention, and of course it's adjustable on here, but it fits really, really well. So this is a really clean draw with the Glock 17. With the Polymer 80 Glock 26, not quite so much, but it does work. Now, I also have a concealed carry holster for my Glock 17, which this is actually still my main carry piece, and this is what I've carried ever since I got it. This, for the longest time, was my only handgun that I owned, and recently doubled it with this purchase. But yeah, so I still conceal carry this pretty much every single day. Because I don't have a good holster for this guy yet. I have one coming, but it's not here yet. But this holster, as I mentioned, does not fit my concealed carry holster at all. It is a horrible fit, and it's a good fit for this, but terrible fit for this. So there can be some holster compatibility issues. That's just one of those things you get when you buy a Polymer 80 that's not a real Glock. One last thing to mention, comparing the two of these together, as I mentioned, the finish quality on the Polymer 80 Glock 26 is not as good as the very, very old, at this point, Gen 3. And on top of that, the frame to slide fit is also not as good. This is about, there's probably about 50% less space between this slide and frame versus this slide and frame. And that is just one of those things that you are going to get. Now, does that really matter for reliability? Probably somewhat. As I mentioned, there have been a few snafus with this specific handgun, but I don't think that that's going to carry on in the future. I have put about 20 rounds of SIG V-Crown through it, and it does feed those just fine. So this will be a good concealed carry piece, and that's why I bought it. Is because I wanted something that was shorter, still had a high round capacity of 12 rounds in a standard magazine, or 10 rounds with a flush fit, but I'd rather have the extra capacity and the full grip. So 12 rounds for standard capacity. Very small, very concealable. It shaves about an inch, a little bit over an inch off the end of the gun, and a little bit over an inch off of the butt of the gun, which is of course the harder part to conceal. Still very, very shootable. You can shoot this very fast. You can carry a lot of ammo. What I would probably do is carry it full with one 12-round magazine, so 12 plus 1, and then a 17-round backup, or even a 20-round backup like this guy with an extended base plate. Giving you, 30 plus rounds of ammunition at your disposal. So that's pretty much it for this video, guys. There will be a companion video to this, goes into a lot more details in the whole testing process, and that will be on my Subscribestar only because YouTube doesn't like those sorts of videos. So I can't put it on YouTube anyway, so that will actually be over on my Subscribestar. If you want to check it out, you can enter for as little as $2 a month, and you'll be automatically entered in giveaways. Generally, the giveaway value is anywhere from 50 to like 200 bucks. So it will pay for itself in no time. But that's pretty much it for the video, guys. I hope you all enjoyed it. I do think this is a very cool little handgun that I will be carrying soon as I get some more rounds through it and of course get that holster in, and we'll see how it goes from there. But once again, thank you guys for watching. I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.